The air in New Orleans was thick with the scent of magnolias and the pulse of jazz, a living heartbeat that thrummed through the streets of the French Quarter. The annual Jazz Fest was a celebration that drew souls from every corner of the world to bask in the city's soulful rhythms. The year was 2013, and the night was alive with the clink of glasses, the laughter of strangers, and the wail of saxophones weaving through the humid air. Under the glow of strung lights and the haze of cigarette smoke, the festival felt like a dream, where time slowed and every note carried a story. Damien Caldwell, a white American man with sharp blue eyes and a jawline that spoke of determination and weariness, stood at the crowd's edge. His fair skin caught the golden light of the lanterns, and his neatly trimmed dark hair was slightly mussed from the evening's heat. At 32, he carried the weight of a fresh betrayal. His business partner, a man he'd trusted like a brother, had swindled him out of half their shipping company's profits. The sting of it burned deeper than the bourbon in his glass. He'd come to the festival not for joy, but for distraction, hoping the music might drown out the noise in his head. The stage ahead was a small one tucked into a courtyard off Bourbon Street, where a band played with the raw passion that made New Orleans legendary. The crowd swayed, some dancing, others lost in the melody. Then a voice cut through the chaos, like velvet, and whiskey smooth, yet jagged, pulling every heart in its wake. Damien's gaze snapped to the stage. Simone Thibodeaux, an African-American woman with a presence that commanded the night, stood under the spotlight. Her skin, a rich brown that glowed under the stage lights, seemed to absorb and reflect the crowd's energy. Her dark curls framed her face, cascading over her shoulders. As she leaned into the microphone, her voice weaving a spell. At 28, she was a force. Her eyes, deep and soulful, held stories of resilience and dreams deferred. She wore a simple red dress that hugged her curves, the fabric swaying with her movements as she sang a rendition of Summertime that felt like a confession. Damien couldn't look away. Each note she sang seemed to reach inside him, loosening the knots of his anger and betrayal. For the first time that night, he felt something other than pain. He moved closer, drawn like a moth to her flame, until he was near enough to see the sweat glistening on her brow, the way her fingers gripped the microphone stand, as if anchoring herself to the earth. When her set ended, the crowd erupted, but Simone slipped off stage, quietly disappearing into the shadows of the courtyard. Damien's feet moved before his mind caught up. He found her near a table laden with plastic cups and a half-empty pitcher of lemonade, her back to him, as she caught her breath. That was... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound foolish. That was like hearing the city itself sing. Simone turned, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of surprise, then a cautious smile. She said high praise for a lounge singer, her voice low and warm, carrying the same cadence that had captivated him on stage. "Are you a local, or just passing through local enough?" Damien replied, leaning against a nearby pillar. "Grew up in Metairie, but I've been distracted by work. Shipping business." "You..." She said she was born and raised in the 9th Ward, her smile softening. "Music's my home, though. Always has been." They talked as the festival pulsed around them, the conversation flowing as easily as the Mississippi. Damien told her about the betrayal words spilling out before he could stop them, how his partner had cooked the books and left him to clean up the mess. Simone listened, her eyes steady, offering no judgment, only understanding. In return, she shared fragments of her story, a childhood filled with music, a dream of singing professionally, and the grind of late-night gigs to make ends meet. "Have you ever thought about leaving?" he asked, gesturing to the chaos of the festival and taking that voice somewhere bigger. She laughed, a sound that carried both joy and weariness. "New Orleans is in my blood. Besides, bigger doesn't always mean better. Sometimes it just means louder. As the night deepened, they wandered the festival together, sharing a plate of beignets dusted with powdered sugar, laughing when the white dust clung to their fingers. The music never stopped, and neither did their conversation. It was as if the city had conspired to keep them together, each note and laugh weaving them closer. By midnight, they found themselves in a quieter corner of the quarter, where the crowds thinned and the music was a distant hum. Under a wrought iron balcony, Damien took a chance. He reached for her hand, his pale fingers brushing against her warm brown skin. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "I don't do this," she said softly, almost to herself. "But tonight feels different." "It does," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. The kiss followed, was electric, a spark that ignited something neither could name. They stumbled into a nearby hotel, a small historic place, with creaking floors and walls that seemed to hum with the city's history. The night was a blur of passion, two souls finding solace in each other's arms. For those hours, the world outside ceased to exist. No betrayal, no grind, just the heat of their connection and the rhythm of their breaths. But dawn brought reality crashing back. A phone call shattered the stillness as they lay tangled in the sheets. Damien's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with his cousin Roland's name. Roland, a white man with a lean frame and a perpetual smirk, had always been more opportunist than family. His light brown hair and hazel eyes gave him a boyish charm, but Damien knew better than to trust it. "Damien, you need to get back to the office." Roland's voice crackled through the speaker, urgent and clipped. "There's a crisis, legal trouble with the company. If you don't show up now, we could lose everything." Damien's heart sank. He glanced at Simone sitting up and pulling the sheet around her, her dark eyes watching him with concern and resignation. "I have to go." He said the words tasting bitter. "I'm sorry." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Go, handle your business." He scribbled his number on a piece of hotel stationery, pressing it into her hand. "Call me, please. This isn't the end." She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sure, Damien." He left the weight of her gaze lingering as he stepped into the early morning light. The crisis Roland had described turned out to be a fabricated mess, a minor contract dispute blown out of proportion. By the time Damien realized he'd been played, hours had passed, and Simone's number, scrawled in haste, was smudged beyond legibility. He tried to find her, scouring the festival's performer lists and local venues, but New Orleans was a city of ghosts, and Simone had vanished into its shadows. Losing in the office with a smug grin, Roland clapped Damien on the shoulder. "You're welcome," he said, as if he'd done him a favor. "Can't have you getting distracted by some singer cousin. We've got an empire to build." Damien's fist clenched, but he said nothing. The betrayal from his partner still stung, and now Roland's manipulation added another layer of distrust. He threw himself into work rebuilding the shipping company from the ground up, determined never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. But in the quiet moments when the city's music drifted through his window, he heard her voice. Simone's voice, calling him back to that night, to the promise they'd left unfinished. For Simone, the morning after was a different kind of ache. She stood in the hotel room clutching the crumpled stationery, her brown fingers tracing the smudged ink. She'd felt something real with Damien, something she hadn't allowed herself to think in years. But his sudden departure, the urgency in his voice, reminded her of every man who'd promised more than they could give. She tore the paper in half and let it fall to the floor. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant, not with one child, but 4 quadruplets, a miracle and a burden all at once. She sat in her small 9th Ward apartment, the sounds of the city filtering through the thin walls. and made a choice. No matter how real the night had felt, she wouldn't chase a man who'd left her behind. She would raise her children alone with the strength of her voice and the love in her heart. As the years passed, the memory of that night became a melody. She couldn't quite forget a song of what might have been played in the key of regret. The years slipped by like a slow jazz ballad, each note heavy with the weight of time. In the heart of New Orleans, Simone Thibodeaux carved out a life for herself and her 4 children, Ella, Noah, Leela, and Theo. Her days were a delicate dance between motherhood and music, each role demanding more than she thought she could give. By day, she was a fierce protector, braiding Ella's hair, helping Noah with math, soothing Lila's scraped knees, and cheering Theo's endless questions about the world. By night, she transformed into the soul of the city's lounge scene, her voice filling smoky rooms with stories of love and loss. The Blue Crescent was her stage, a dimly lit venue tucked off Frenchman Street. The walls lined with faded posters of jazz legends seemed to whisper encouragement as she sang. The regulars knew her loved her, but the gigs barely paid enough to cover rent and the endless needs of 4 growing children. She'd long since abandoned dreams of stardom, trading them for the practicalities of diapers, school supplies, and secondhand clothes. Yet every time she stepped to the microphone, she poured her heart into the music, as if each song could stitch together the pieces of her fractured dreams. The quadruplets were her light, each with a spark that reminded her of that festival night 2013. Ella, the eldest by minutes, had a sharp wit and a love for books. Noah was the dreamer, sketching ships and oceans in his notebooks. Lila carried a quiet strength, always watching out for her siblings. The youngest Theo had a laugh that could light up a room and a curiosity that kept Simone on her toes. She never spoke of their father, not to them or anyone else. The memory of Damien was a locked box in her heart, opened only in the quiet hours when the city slept, and her mind wandered to what might have been. Damien Caldwell built an empire across town in a sleek office overlooking the Mississippi. The shipping company, once teetering on the edge of ruin, was now a powerhouse, with contracts spanning the Gulf Coast and beyond. He worked tirelessly negotiating deals, outmaneuvering competitors, and burying himself in spreadsheets to avoid the emptiness in his chest. The betrayal by his former partner had hardened him, turning trust into a luxury he couldn't afford. He kept people at arm's length, his relationships shallow and fleeting, his focus singular success. Yet no matter how high he climbed, the memory of that night at Jazz Fest haunted him. Simone's voice was a ghost in his mind, a melody that surfaced in the quiet moments between meetings or in the dead of night when sleep wouldn't come. Years ago, he'd tried to find her, but the trail had gone cold. New Orleans was a city of secrets, and she'd slipped through its cracks. He wondered if she'd forgotten him, if that night had meant as little to her as it had seemed to suggest to the world. The thought gnawed at him, a quiet ache he couldn't name. His cousin Roland remained a constant presence, a shadow in the boardroom, and a thorn in his side. Roland had a knack for inserting himself into Damien's life, offering advice laced with self-interest. He managed parts of the company's logistics, always angling for more control, his smiles never quite reaching his eyes. Damien tolerated him not out of affection, but necessity. Family ties were complicated, and Roland knew too much about the company's early days to be cut loose entirely. Simone, meanwhile, faced her own battles. The lounge circuit was a grind, with club owners who paid late and audiences who sometimes cared more for their drinks than her songs. She'd faced whispers of scandal rumors that she'd used men to climb the ladder, lies that stung all the more because they echoed her insecurities. She wasn't good polished or connected enough to break into the big leagues. But she kept singing because the music was her anchor, the one place where she could be wholly herself. The children were her reason to keep going. Ella's sharp questions about history, Noah's sketches of boats that looked eerily like the ones Damien's company ran, Lila's quiet moments of helping with chores, and Theo's endless whys, they were her world. She taught them to love music, playing old jazz records on a second-hand turntable, watching their faces light up as Ella Fitzgerald or Louis Armstrong filled the room. She told them stories of New Orleans Mardi Gras and second lines, but never of the man who'd given them half their DNA. That story was too raw, too tangled with regret. Damien's life, by contrast, was a study in control. His office was a fortress of glass and steel, and his schedule was a relentless march of meetings and deals. He traveled often to Houston, Miami, even London, but New Orleans always pulled him back. The city's music chaos and life were in his blood, even if he tried to deny it. He attended galas and charity events, shaking hands with politicians and investors. But his smile was a mask. The women who flirted with him at these events never held his interest. They weren't hers. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Damien found himself in a dive bar on the edge of the quarter. The band was mediocre, the beer warm, but he stayed nursing a drink as the singer, a young woman with a decent voice, but none of Simone's fire crooned a cover of Misty. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back at Jazz Fest, standing in that courtyard, hearing Simone for the first time. The memory was so vivid, it hurt. He didn't know that across town, Simone was singing the same song to a small crowd at the Blue Crescent. Her voice carried the weight of the years of raising 4 children alone, of dreams deferred, but never abandoned. The audience was sparse that night, but she sang as if the room were full, as if her voice could reach beyond the walls and into the heart of someone who'd once heard her and never forgotten. The distance between them was more than miles, years of choices, fears, and unspoken truths. Damien's heart was a locked vault sealed shut by betrayal and ambition. Simone's was a fortress too built from necessity and pride. Yet in the rhythm of New Orleans, their stories were still intertwined, 2 melodies waiting for the right chord to bring them back together. As the city pulsed on, oblivious to their separate lives, fate was already setting the stage. A charity event loomed, bringing Simone's voice and Damien's longing into the same room again. The notes of their past were still there waiting to be played, and the city, always listening, knew the song wasn't over yet. The French Quarter hummed with its usual chaos, but tonight the energy felt sharper, as if the city itself sensed a collision of fates. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2023, and the grand ballroom of the Hotel Monteleone was alight with chandeliers and the murmur of New Orleans elite. The event was a charity gala for a local children's hospital, a glittering affair where the city's wealthiest mingled with artists and philanthropists, all dressed in their finest. The air carried the scent of jasmine perfume and the clink of champagne flutes, but currents of ambition and secrets swirled beneath the polished surface. Simone Thibodeaux stood backstage, her fingers smoothing the hem of her emerald green gown. The dress hugged her curves, its fabric catching the dim light as she paced. She'd been invited to perform tonight, a rare opportunity to sing for a crowd that could open doors or slam them shut. Her heart raced not from nerves about performing, but from the weight of being here, in a world so far from her usual haunts. The Blue Crescent was her home, where the crowd knew her name, but this ballroom was a battlefield of wealth and influence, and she felt like an outsider. She adjusted her earrings, simple gold hoops that gleamed against her dark curls, and took a deep breath. The band was warming up, the soft strum of a double bass mingling with the pianist's scales. Simone closed her eyes, letting the music ground her. She'd chosen a set list of jazz standards tonight's songs that told stories of longing and resilience, songs that felt like pieces of her soul. She didn't know why this gig felt different, heavier, but she pushed the thought aside. She had a job to do. Across the ballroom, Damien Caldwell stood near a marble pillar with a glass of bourbon. He wore a tailored black suit that spoke of power and precision. His posture relaxed, but his eyes restless. He'd attended countless galas like this, shaking hands with council members and CEOs, but tonight he felt unmoored. The shipping empire he'd built was thriving, but the emptiness inside him had grown a hollow space no deal or dollar could fill. Half listening to a conversation about port regulations, he scanned the room when the MC's voice cut through the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the soulful voice of New Orleans, Ms. Simone Thibodeaux." The name hit Damien like a freight train. His glass froze halfway to his lips, his breath catching. It couldn't be her, not after all these years. But as the spotlight illuminated the stage, there she was. Simone stepped forward, her presence commanding the room, her voice rising in the opening notes of My Funny Valentine. The melody was haunting each word, laced with a tenderness that pierced straight through him. Damien's world narrowed to her. The crowd, the chatter, the clinking glasses all faded. Her voice was the same, yet different, carrying the weight of years he hadn't witnessed. Her eyes scanned the audience, and for a fleeting moment they locked with his. Recognition flashed across her face. A flicker of shock mirrored his own. Her voice faltered for half a beat, but she recovered, pouring herself into the song as if it were a lifeline. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was 2013 again that night at Jazz Fest, her voice pulling him out of his pain. But now, there was something more in her gaze, something guarded, a secret she held close. He felt it like a storm coming before the first rain falls. She knew something he didn't, and it gnawed at him. The room erupted in applause when her set ended, but Simone didn't linger for the praise. She slipped backstage, her heart pounding, and seeing Damien had unraveled her. He was here in the flesh, not a memory or a ghost. The years had sharpened him, his presence more commanding, but those blue eyes were the same, searching and intense. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing herself to stay calm. She couldn't let him see how much he'd affected her, not when she carried a secret that could change everything, their 4 children, Ella, Noah, Lila, and Theo. Damien, meanwhile, was already moving. He handed his glass to a passing waiter and wove through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances of gala-goers. He reached the backstage door, flashing a smile, and his name to the security guard who let him pass. The hallway was narrow, lined with equipment cases and flickering fluorescent lights. He found her in a small dressing room, adjusting her shawl in front of a cracked mirror. "Simone," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. She turned, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "Damien, been a while. 10 years, he said, stepping closer. "I looked for you. After that night I tried, but you had a crisis." She finished, her tone clipped. "I remember." He winced, the memory of Roland's manipulation sharp. It wasn't what it seemed. "My cousin. He pulled me away. I didn't mean to leave like that." She crossed her arms, studying him. "And yet you did." The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. Damien wanted to ask why she hadn't called or vanished, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, "You were incredible tonight. You've always been great." Her lips curved, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks. I've got to get back out there. They're expecting an encore." She moved to leave, but he stepped into her path, not touching her, but close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. "Can we talk? After this, please." Simone hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. She wanted to say no to protect the life she'd built, but something in his eyes, raw, unguarded, made her pause. "Maybe," she said finally. "Find me after the show." She slipped past him, her perfume lingering like a promise. Oxytocin. Damien stood frozen, watching her disappear into the crowd. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of that night a decade ago and the years since. She was hiding something, he was sure of it. The thought both intrigued and unsettled him. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. Simone performed her encore, a soulful rendition of At Last, that left the room breathless. Damien watched from the sidelines, his heart tangled with awe and regret. When she finished, admirers swarmed her, and he didn't approach her again. Not yet. He needed answers, but he sensed she needed space. As he left the hotel, the city's night air hit him like a wake-up call. He'd find her again, no matter what it took. Simone, meanwhile, sat in a cab, heading home, her mind a storm. The children were with a sitter, safe and unaware of the man who'd just re-entered her life. She'd spent years guarding her heart, protecting her family. But seeing Damien had cracked something open inside her, and she wasn't sure she could close it again. Their children's secret loomed large, a truth she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, Damien sat in his office staring at the Mississippi. The gala had left him restless, his thoughts consumed by Simone. He'd called in favors to track down her current gig, the Blue Crescent Lounge. He'd go. Tonight, he decided to see her again, to understand why she'd run from him all those years ago. But as he made the decision, a shadow fell across his desk. Roland leaned against the doorframe, his smirk as sharp as ever. "Heard you were at the gala last night," he said, strolling in uninvited and making new friends. Damien's jaw tightened. "Just supporting a good cause." Roland raised an eyebrow, dropping into a chair. "Sure. That singer, though, Simone, right? She's got a reputation, you know. Climbs the ladder any way she can." The words hit like a punch, but Damien kept his face neutral. "You don't know her. And you do." Roland's tone was mocking. "Careful, cousin. Women like that, they'll bleed you dry." Damien stood, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out." Roland laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just looking out for you, man." He left, but his words lingered, sowing doubt in Damien's troubled mind. Unaware of Roland's scheming, Simone spent the day with her children, trying to anchor herself in their laughter and chaos. But Damien's face kept surfacing in her thoughts. His eyes, his voice, how he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She didn't trust him, not after he'd left her behind. But she couldn't deny the pull, the unfinished melody of their past. As she prepared for her evening gig, she steeled herself. If he showed up, she'd face him. But she wouldn't let him in, not again. The Blue Crescent was alive with the low hum of conversation and the clink of glasses as Simone took the stage. The lounge was a haven for jazz lovers, its dim lights and worn velvet curtains creating an intimate cocoon. She wore a simple black dress tonight, her curls loose and framing her face, her presence magnetic as she began to sing "Cry Me a River." Her voice wove through the room, rich and raw, turning heads and quieting chatter. But her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the memory of Damien's gaze at the gala the night before. Damien sat at a corner table, half hidden in the shadows, his bourbon untouched. He'd come straight from the office, driven by a need he couldn't name. Watching Simone now, he felt the same pull as he had 10 years ago, but it was laced with something new. Confusion, doubt, and a nagging sense of betrayal. Roland's words echoed in his head. "She's got a reputation. Climbs the ladder any way she can." He didn't want to believe it, but his past had fertilized the seed of doubt with a deceitful partner. Trust was a fragile thing, and his was in short supply. Simone felt his presence before she saw him, a prickle of awareness that made her falter mid-note. Her eyes found him in the crowd, his intense stare cutting through the haze of cigarette smoke. She finished the song with a flourish, her heart pounding, and announced a short break. The crowd applauded, but she barely heard it as she stepped off stage, heading for the bar to steady herself. Damien approached his movements deliberate, like a man navigating a minefield. "You didn't call," he said, his voice low enough to blend with the background music. She sipped her water, her eyes guarded. "Didn't have a reason to." His jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I thought we had something." That night was long ago. She cut in, setting her glass down. "People move on, Damien. Have you?" The question was soft, but carried weight, like a stone dropped into still water. She didn't answer, her gaze flickering away. The truth was too heavy. 4 children, his children, growing up in her 9th Ward apartment while she sang her heart out in places like this. She couldn't tell him, not when she didn't trust him, not when she wasn't sure what he'd do with the truth. Instead, she said, "What do you want, Damien?" "A trip down memory lane." "I want to know why you disappeared," he said, stepping closer. "I want to know what happened." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Life happened. You left. I kept going." The words stung, but before he could respond, a man in a cheap suit approached, his smile too wide. "Simone, great set," he said, glancing at Damien with curiosity. "Got a minute? There's a promoter here who wants to talk." Simone nodded, grateful for the interruption. "Duty calls," she said to Damien, brushing past him. He watched her go, his chest tight with frustration. Something was wrong, something bigger than a decade-old misunderstanding, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Meanwhile, Roland was busy. He sat in a dimly lit bar across town, nursing a whiskey and spinning his web. He'd always resented Damien's success, the way he'd clawed his way to the top of the shipping world, while Roland played second fiddle. The gala had given him an opportunity to dig up dirt on Simone and use it to keep Damien in line. He'd spent the day spreading rumors through carefully placed calls and whispered conversations with industry insiders. He claimed Simone had a history of using men to get ahead, her talent a mere facade for ambition. The lies were subtle, plausible, and designed to spread like wildfire. By the following evening, the rumors had reached the Blue Crescent's owner, a gruff man named Jimmy, who'd always had a soft spot for Simone. He pulled her aside before her, set his face grim. "Heard some talk about you, Simone," he said, scratching his beard. "People are saying you got cozy with some big shots to land gigs." "That true?" Simone's stomach dropped. "You know me, Jimmy. That's not who I am." He studied her, his eyes kind but wary. "I believe you. But the talk's out there. Promoters are getting skittish. You gotta be careful." She nodded, her throat tight. The rumors felt like a betrayal, a knife in the back from an unseen enemy. She suspected Roland, Damien's slick cousin, had been at the gala. His smirk unmistakable, but she had no proof. All she could do was keep singing and keep proving herself. But the weight of it pressed down on her, feeding the voice in her head that whispered she'd never be good enough for the world beyond these walls. Damien, too, was grappling with the rumors. Roland had cornered him at the office that morning, dropping hints about Simone's past. "Just saying," cousin Roland had said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't know her as well as you think. Word is, she's got a trail of broken hearts and big favors behind her." Damien's fists clenched under the desk. "You're full of it, Roland." "Am I?" Roland shrugged, his eyes gleaming. "Ask around. People talk." Damien did ask around, discreetly, calling a few industry contacts. The responses were vague, but troubling whispers of Simone's ambition, her charm used as a weapon. He didn't believe it, not entirely, but the doubt festered. His past betrayal had left scars, and the idea of being played again twisted his gut. He needed to see and confront her, but every time he tried, she slipped away, her walls higher than ever. Simone felt the rumors closing in like a noose. Her children sensed her tension at home, though she tried to hide it. Ella, sharp as ever, asked Mama, "You okay? You look sad." Simone forced a smile, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Just tired, baby. Big show tonight." But the show was a battle. The crowd was smaller than usual, and the energy was off. Whispers of the rumors had reached the audience, and some regulars avoided her eyes. She sang anyway, her voice fierce and defiant, pouring her pain into stormy weather. Damien was in the same corner again, his presence a magnet she couldn't ignore. When the set ended, she didn't run this time. She marched to his table, her resolve like steel. "You keep showing up," she said, hands on her hips. "Why?" he replied, "Because I need to know the truth," standing to meet her gaze. "People are talking, Simone. Saying things about you. About us." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of things?" He hesitated, the words bitter on his tongue. "That you used me, that night at Jazz Fest, to get ahead." She froze, her face a mask of fury and hurt. "You believe that?" He admitted, "I don't know what to believe," his voice raw. "I want to trust you, but then don't," she snapped, turning away. "I don't need your trust, Damien. I never did." She walked away, her heart breaking under the weight of her own silence. She hadn't used him, Shiataros. System him, but the lie of omission felt like a wall she couldn't climb. The truth about their children was a secret too big, too heavy, and the rumors only deepened her fear that he'd never understand. She couldn't tell him now, not when distrust hung between them like fog. Damien watched her go, his chest aching. He didn't believe the rumors, but the doubt lingered, a poison seeping into his thoughts. Roland's words and the whispers from industry contacts were a chorus he couldn't silence. He left the lounge, the city's humid air wrapping around him like a shroud. He needed answers, but Simone's walls were impenetrable, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to break them down. Across town, Roland smirked over a drink, his plan unfolding perfectly. The rumors were spreading, and with every whisper Simone's world grew smaller, and Damien's trust wavered. Roland had his own reasons. Power, control, a chance to keep Damien under his thumb. But he didn't know about the secret that could unravel everything about the children. For now, he was content to watch the chaos unfold, sure that his cousin's heart was a battlefield he could exploit. Simone sat in her apartment that night, and the children were asleep in their rooms. She held a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights. The rumors hurt more than she'd admit, feeding the insecurities she'd fought for years. She was a single mother, a lounge singer, a woman who'd never felt quite good enough for the world's spotlight. And Damien, his doubt, his questions had cut deeper than she expected. She wanted to tell him about their children, to bridge the gap between them. But fear held her back. What if he tried to take them? What if he saw her as the opportunist the rumors painted her to be? She didn't know that Damien was wrestling with the same fears, his heart torn between longing and suspicion. The city hummed around them, its music a constant reminder of the night they'd met, the night that had changed everything. And though they were miles apart, their hearts were still tethered, caught in a melody neither could escape. The New Orleans morning was heavy with humidity, which clung to the skin and made the air feel like a living thing. Simone Thibodeaux sat at her kitchen table in her Ninth Ward apartment, surrounded by the chaos of breakfast. Ella was reading a library book, her spoon hovering over a bowl of cereal. Noah sketched a sailboat on a napkin, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lila helped Theo butter a piece of toast, her quiet efficiency contrasting with his chatter about a school project on jazz history. The quadruplets filled the small space with life, their voices a symphony of laughter and squabbles. Simone sipped her coffee, trying to anchor herself in this routine. But her mind was elsewhere, on Damien Caldwell, the rumors swirling around her and the secret she'd kept for a decade. Across town, Damien stood on the balcony of his high-rise office, the Mississippi River glinting below. The city's pulse was a constant undercurrent, but his thoughts were tangled in the past few days' events. Simone's performance at the Blue Crescent. Her sharp words, the rumors Roland had seeded, they churned in his mind like a storm. He didn't believe the whispers about her using him, not deep down, but the doubt lingered, a splinter he couldn't dislodge. He needed to see her again to find the truth beneath her guarded eyes. Fate, however, had other plans. That afternoon, Damien was at a local community center, delivering a donation of school supplies on behalf of his company. It was a routine PR move, but he'd chosen to attend in person, craving a break from the office's sterile walls. The center was a hive of activity, children darting through the halls, their voices echoing off the linoleum. Damien spoke with the director when 4 kids caught his eye. They were unmistakable quadruplets moving as a unit, their features so strikingly familiar, it stopped him cold. Ella, the leader, was explaining something to a teacher, her hands animated. Noah carried a stack of art supplies, his eyes scanning the room. Lila was organizing a table of books, her movements precise, while Theo bounced on his toes, asking questions about a poster on the wall. Damien's breath caught. Their faces and mannerisms were like looking into a mirror, but softer, younger, with traces of someone else. Someone he knew. He approached slowly, his heart pounding. "Hey," he said, crouching to Theo's level. "What's that poster about?" Theo grinned, launching into an explanation about Louis Armstrong. Damien listened, but his eyes darted to the others, noting their eyes' shape and the curve of their smiles. It was impossible, yet undeniable. He straightened, his mind racing. "What's your name, kid?" "Theo," he said proudly. "And that's Ella, Noah, and Lila. We're quads." Damien's smile froze. Quadruplets. The math aligned too perfectly with that night 10 years ago. He excused himself, his pulse hammering, as he stepped outside to call a contact, a private investigator he'd used for business dealings. "I need a DNA test," he said, his voice low, discreetly, and fast. Simone, meanwhile, was at the Blue Crescent rehearsing for that night's set. Her phone buzzed with a text from the community center's director, thanking her for letting the kids volunteer. She smiled, proud of their initiative, but the thought of them out in the world where Damien might cross their path sent a chill through her. She'd kept them separate from her past, but New Orleans was a small city in its own way, and secrets had a way of surfacing. 2 days later, Damien sat in a coffee shop, a manila envelope in his hands. The investigator had worked quickly, obtaining samples from a discarded juice box Theo had left at the center and comparing them to a sample from Damien. The results were unequivocal, 99.9% probability of paternity. Damien stared at the paper, his world tilting. 4 children. His children. Simone had known, and she'd never told him. He drove to her apartment, the address obtained through the same investigator. The building was modest, its paint peeling, but the sound of a trumpet drifted from an open window, a reminder of the city's soul. He knocked, his heart a drumbeat. When Simone opened the door, her eyes widened, then narrowed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before she could protest. The apartment was small but warm, filled with books, drawings, and a turntable spinning a Billie Holiday record. The children weren't home, likely at school, but their presence was everywhere, in the photos on the walls, the toys scattered on the couch. Damien held up the envelope. "I know about the kids, Simone. Ella, Noah, Lila, Theo. They're mine." Her face crumpled, a mix of fear and resignation. She sank onto a chair, her hands trembling. "How did you—" "I saw them," he said, his voice breaking at the community center. "I had a test done. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away, her eyes glistening. "You left Damien. That morning you walked out and I was alone. I found out I was pregnant, quadruplets no less, and I had to make a choice. I couldn't chase a man who might not want this life, or like us. I would have stayed, he said, his voice raw. If I'd known, I would have stayed. Would you? She stood, her eyes blazing. You were building your empire, Damien. I was a lounge singer, with nothing but a voice and a dream. What would you have done with 4 kids? Taken them. Fought me for them. I couldn't risk that. The words hit him like a wave. He saw the years he'd missed, their first steps, laughter, and lives flashing before him. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Simone. I'm so damn sad. She wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening. I did what I had to do. They're my world. I won't let you take them. I don't want to take them, he said, stepping closer. I want to know them. If you'll let me, I want to be part of their lives. She studied him, searching for a lie, but his eyes were open, raw with pain and hope. For the first time, she saw not the man who'd left, but the one who'd returned. Still, fear lingered. I need time, she said finally. This isn't just about you and me. It's about them. He nodded, his throat tight. I'll wait as long as it takes. As he left, the city's music seemed to mourn with him, the notes of a distant saxophone echoing his regret. Simone closed the door, leaning against it, her heart a battlefield of trust and fear. The children would be home soon, and she'd have to decide how to tell them about the father they'd never known. The days that followed were a blur for both. Damien threw himself into work, but his thoughts were with the children, their faces haunting him. He wanted to know them. Ella's sharp wit, Noah's quiet creativity, Lila's steady strength, Theo's boundless curiosity. But he respected Simone's need for space. He sent her a letter, not through a lawyer, but in his handwriting, promising to follow her lead and be patient. Simone, meanwhile, grappled with the weight of her secret revealed. She watched her children closely, searching for signs of their father in their laughter, their gestures. Ella's determination, Noah's love of the sea, Lila's quiet resolve, Theo's endless questions. They were pieces of Damien, and that truth both comforted and terrified her. She hadn't decided how to introduce him, or if she would, but the choice was no longer hers. Roland, oblivious to the children, continued his scheming. He'd noticed Damien's distraction, the way his cousin's focus had shifted from the company to something personal. Roland saw an opportunity to tighten his grip to keep Damien off balance. He didn't know about the quadruplets, but he knew Simone was a weak point, and he pressed it, spreading more rumors to keep her on the defensive. For Simone, the rumors were a growing storm, threatening her livelihood. For Damien, the revelation of his children was a seismic shift, a chance to rebuild what he'd lost. But the path forward was fraught, and the city watched its music, a reminder that some songs could only be sung together. The Blue Crescent was packed, the air thick with anticipation, as Simone prepared for her biggest show in months. A local promoter had booked her for a special event, a showcase for up-and-coming artists that could lead to a recording deal. The stage was set with extra lights, the band polished to perfection, and Simone's set list was a love letter to New Orleans, songs of resilience, heartbreak, and hope. She wore a deep blue dress that shimmered under the lights, her curls swept up to reveal the determined set of her jaw. This was her chance to rise above the rumors, to prove she was more than the whispers Roland had spread. But trouble was brewing. Ever the opportunist, Roland had caught wind of the showcase through his network of industry contacts. He saw Simone's rising star as a threat to his hold over Damien, who'd been distracted since their last confrontation. Roland wasn't one to play fair. He'd hired a thug, a lowlife named Vince, who worked odd jobs for shady deals to sabotage the event. The plan was simple: disrupt the show, make it look like an accident, and let Simone's reputation take the hit. Backstage, Simone ran through her warm-ups, unaware of the danger. The band was in high spirits, the drummer joking about the crowd's energy. But as they set up a stagehand, noticed a loose cable near the bassist's amplifier. "Careful with that," he muttered, securing it. No one thought much of it. Equipment issues were common, but the cable had been deliberately frayed, a trap set to spark during Simone's set. Across town, Damien sat in his office, a stack of contracts untouched. His mind was on Simone and the children. He'd kept his distance, honoring her request for time, but the pull to see her was stronger than ever. He'd heard about the showcase through a colleague and decided to attend, not to confront her, but to support her, to show he was serious about being part of her world. He slipped into a dark jacket and drove to the Blue Crescent, the city's lights blurring past like a jazz riff. The show began flawlessly. Simone's voice filled the room, her rendition of "Ain't Misbehavin'" drawing cheers from the crowd. Damien stood at the back, his heart swelling with pride and regret. She was a force, her presence commanding, her voice bridging past and present. But as she transitioned to blue skies, a spark erupted from the bassist's amplifier. The crowd gasped as the bassist, a veteran named Marcus, stumbled back, clutching his hand. Smoke curled upward, and the music faltered. Simone froze, her instincts kicking in. She signaled the band to stop rushing to Marcus's side. "You okay?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Just a shock." Marcus grunted, but his hand was red, the skin blistered. The stage manager called for a medic, and the crowd murmured, some edging toward the exits. Damien pushed through the crowd, his heart racing. He reached the stage just as Simone was helping Marcus to a chair. "What happened?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the equipment. "Bad wiring," the stage manager said, but Damien's gut told him otherwise. He'd seen enough sabotage in his business to recognize it. He knelt by the amplifier, spotting the frayed cable, its edges too clean to be accidental. "This was no accident," he said, his voice low. Simone's eyes met his, a flicker of trust passing between them. "You sure I've seen this kind of thing before?" he said, standing. "Someone wanted this to go wrong." The promoter, a wiry man named Clara, approached, her face grim. "Simone, we can't continue like this. The crowd's spooked, and Marcus needs a doctor." Simone's heart sank. This was her moment, and it was slipping away. But before she could respond, Damien stepped in. "Give me 10 minutes, he said to Clara. "I'll get a tech to check every cable and every plug. Simone deserves to finish her set." Clara hesitated, but Damien's authority was undeniable. He called a contact from his company, a tech who worked on ship electronics, and within minutes, the stage was being inspected. Simone watched, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Why was he here? Why was he helping? The tech confirmed the sabotage, a single cable tampered with to spark on cue. Damien's jaw tightened. Roland's fingerprints were all over this, though he had no proof. Yet, he turned to Simone. "You're going back on. They need to hear you." She nodded, her resolve hardening. "For Marcus," she said, and for herself, though she didn't say it aloud. The crowd had thinned, but those who stayed were loyal, cheering as Simone returned to the stage. She dedicated the next song to Marcus, launching into "What a Wonderful World" with a depth that brought tears to the room. Damien stood at the edge, his eyes never leaving her, pride and protectiveness warring in his chest. After the show, Clara pulled Simone aside. "You pulled it off," she said, a smile breaking through. "I'm recommending you for a studio session. You've got something special." Simone's heart leapt, but the victory was bittersweet. She turned to Damien, who lingered nearby. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. "Because you deserve it," he said. "And because I'm starting to see what I've been missing." The moment was fragile, a thread of trust weaving between them, but it was interrupted by a call from Jimmy, the Blue Crescent's owner. "Simone, I got a call from a promoter in Baton Rouge. They're offering you a weekly gig, which is good money. I told them you're solid no matter what the rumors say. Simone's eyes widened. Jimmy had always believed in her, and now he was fighting for her. She thanked him, her voice thick with emotion, then turned to Damien. She said this doesn't change anything, but her tone was softer, less confident. I know, he said, but I'm not going anywhere. As he left, the city's night air carried the faint strains of a trumpet, a reminder that their story was far from over. Roland, meanwhile, was in a dive bar, cursing under his breath, as Vince reported the failed sabotage. She got lucky, Vince said, shrugging. Roland's eyes narrowed. Luck runs out, he muttered. He didn't know about the children, but he knew Simone was a threat and to do whatever it took to keep Damien under his control. The stakes were rising, and the city's rhythm pulsed with the promise of a reckoning. The New Orleans night was alive with its usual cacophony: street musicians, coaxing melodies from trumpets, the clatter of beads from late-night revelers, and the hum of conversations spilling from bars. Simone Thibodeaux sat in her Ninth Ward apartment, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. Her children, Ella, Noah, Lila, and Theo, were asleep, their soft breaths a quiet counterpoint to the city's pulse. She held a cup of chamomile tea, its steam curling upward, but her mind was far from calm. The showcase at the Blue Crescent had been a triumph, despite the sabotage, and Damien's unexpected help had cracked open a door she'd kept locked for years. Yet the weight of her secret, their children, and the rumors swirling around her career pressed heavily on her chest. Across town, Damien Caldwell paced his high-rise office, the Mississippi River a dark ribbon below. The revelation of his children had shifted his world, but Simone's hesitation to let him in kept him at arm's length. He wanted to know Ella, Noah, Lila, and Theo to be more than strangers to them, but he respected her need for time. Still, the sabotage at the Blue Crescent gnawed at him. He suspected Roland, his cousin, whose sly comments and convenient crises had always carried a hidden agenda. Damien needed proof, something to pin Roland down, but his cousin was slippery, always one step ahead. The morning brought an unexpected twist. Simone found an unmarked envelope slipped under her apartment door, except for her name scrawled in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and anonymous. Simone. The rumors aren't random. Roland Caldwell is behind them. He's hiding more than you know. Ask about his father's deals with Gulf Coast shipping. There's blood on those contracts. Watch your back. Her heart raced as she reread it, the words sinking in. Gulf Coast Shipping was a rival company, one Damien had outmaneuvered years ago. Roland's father, a shadowy figure in the family's history, had been a silent partner in Damien's early ventures. Simone had heard whispers of shady deals but never specifics. The note's warning about blood sent a chill through her. She folded it carefully, tucking it into her purse. She didn't trust anonymous notes, but the mention of Roland confirmed her suspicions. He'd been at the gala, his smirk a constant thorn, and now he'd tried to ruin her showcase. But why? And what did he stand to gain? Damien, meanwhile, received a similar envelope at his office, which was delivered to his assistant, but with no return address. His note was briefer, but no less cryptic. Damien, your father's dealings with the Gulf Coast weren't clean. Roland knows and uses it to control you. Check the 2010 contracts. A friend. Damien's jaw tightened as he read it. His father had died years ago, leaving behind a legacy of ambition and secrets. Damien had always suspected there was more to the family's rise in the shipping world, but he'd buried those questions, focusing on rebuilding after his partner's betrayal. The note suggested Roland was leveraging that past to keep him in check, a puppet on strings Damien hadn't seen. He called his lawyer Evelyn, a no-nonsense woman, and asked her to pull the company's archive contracts from 2010. Discreetly, he added, "No one can know." Simone spent the day distracted, her thoughts on the note, as she took the kids to school. Ella noticed her unease, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Mama, you okay?" she asked, adjusting her backpack. "Just thinking about work," baby Simone lied, forcing a smile. "Big show coming up." Ella didn't push, but her gaze lingered too perceptive for her own good. Simone kissed her forehead, then waved as the quadruplets joined their classmates. She headed to the Blue Crescent for a rehearsal, the note burning a hole in her purse. She hadn't told Damien about it, unsure if she could trust him with something this volatile. But the idea of Roland orchestrating her downfall, and possibly Damien's, made her blood boil. She needed answers, but she also needed to protect her children. That evening, Damien drove to the Blue Crescent, his mind a tangle of questions. The anonymous note had rattled him, but seeing Simone was a compulsion he couldn't shake. He arrived early, slipping into a corner booth as the lounge filled with regulars. Simone was already on stage, running through a sound check, her voice a low hum that stirred memories of their night a decade ago. He watched her, noting the strength in her posture, the fire in her eyes. She was fighting something he could tell, and he wondered if it was the same shadow he was chasing. After the sound check, Simone spotted him and approached, her expression guarded but softer than before. She said, "You're becoming a regular," sliding into the booth across from him. "Couldn't stay away," he replied, his tone light, but his eyes serious. "You okay after the other night?" She hesitated, then pulled the note from her purse, sliding it across the table. "This showed up today. Do you know anything about it?" Damien's brow furrowed as he read it. He reached into his jacket, producing his own note. "I got one too, same vibe, different angle." They exchanged glances, the air between them charged with shared suspicion. Roland, Simone said, her voice low. "He's been gunning for me since the gala. Now this." Damien nodded, his jaw tight. "He's been playing me too. Always has. But this Gulf Coast, my father, is deeper than I thought." Simone leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you know about your father's deals?" "Not enough," he admitted. He was cagey about the early days. "I was too busy cleaning up after my partner's mess to dig. But if Roland's using this to hurt you, to pull us—" He trailed off, the word "us" hanging between them. Simone's heart skipped, but she pushed it aside. She said, "We need to find out what he's hiding before he does more damage." They agreed to keep the notes secret and dig quietly. Damien promised to share whatever Evelyn found in the contracts, and Simone decided to ask around her industry contacts discreetly. It was a fragile alliance built on necessity rather than trust. But it was a start. The next day, Damien met Evelyn at a quiet cafe away from the office's prying eyes. She slid a folder across the table, her expression grim. "Your father's deals with the Gulf Coast were dirty," she said. "Back in 2010, he cut corners, bribes, falsified safety reports, even a hush payment after a worker died in a dock accident. Roland's father was in on it, and Roland inherited the paper trail. He subtly held it over your head to keep you in line." Damien's stomach churned. "Why didn't I know? You were young, focused on growth," Evelyn said. "Your father kept you in the dark. But Roland's been using this to secure his role in the company. If it goes public, it could tank your reputation." Damien nodded, his mind racing. He needed to confront Roland, but not yet. He needed proof, something to neutralize his cousin's leverage. He thanked Evelyn and headed to the Blue Crescent, where Simone performed a small set. Simone, meanwhile, had spoken to Jimmy, the lounge's owner. He'd heard whispers of Roland's involvement in the rumor mill, confirming the note's claims. "He's got connections," Jimmy said, shaking his head. "Slippery bastard. Be careful, Simone." That night, as Simone sang "I Put a Spell on You," her voice was a weapon, sharp and defiant. Damien watched from the crowd, his resolve hardening. They were in this together now, whether they wanted to be or not. Roland's schemes were a threat to them both, and the secrets of the past were a ticking bomb. The city's music pulsed around them, a reminder that some truths could only be uncovered in harmony. The blue crescent was transformed for the night, its usual dim intimacy replaced by a vibrant energy. A local radio station had sponsored a jazz showcase billing it as New Orleans' heartbeat, and Simone was the centerpiece. The stage was adorned with fairy lights, the band expanded with a guest trumpeter, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Simone stood backstage, her nerves a live wire, but her focus was razor-sharp. This was more than a performance, it was a declaration. The rumors, Roland's sabotage, and the weight of her secret about the children fueled her. Tonight, she'd sing like the city itself was listening. She wore a crimson dress that flowed like a river, its hem brushing the floor as she moved. Her curls were pinned loosely, a few strands framing her face, and her eyes held a fire that could light up the quarter. The band struck up the opening notes of Feeling Good, and Simone stepped into the spotlight, her voice soaring. Each note was a confession, a story of pain and triumph, of a love she'd buried but never forgotten. The crowd leaned in captivated as she poured her soul into the song. Damien sat at a front table, his eyes locked on her. He'd come not just to support her, but to feel her, to understand the woman she'd become in the years he'd missed. The anonymous notes, the revelations about his father's deals and Roland's schemes weighed on him. But watching Simone, he felt a clarity he hadn't known in years. She was his anchor, a melody he couldn't shake, and he was done running from it. As Simone transitioned to Lover Man, her voice softened, each word a caress. The lyrics spoke of longing, of a love that lingered despite time and distance, and Damien felt them like a mirror to his own heart. He stood drawn to the stage as if pulled by a tide. The crowd murmured, but Simone didn't falter, her eyes meeting his as he approached. In a moment of reckless courage, he stepped onto the stage, taking the second microphone the trumpeter handed him. "I know this one," he said, his voice low, a smile tugging at his lips. Simone's eyes widened, but she nodded, a spark of trust igniting. They sang together, their voices weaving in a harmony that felt like fate. Damien's baritone was rougher and untrained, but it carried a raw honesty that complemented her soulful depth. The crowd erupted, the room electric with their connection. The world was just them for those few minutes, their voices passed unspoken promises. Backstage, Roland watched from the shadows, his face a mask of fury. He'd come to ensure the rumors had done their work, to see Simone falter under the pressure. Instead, she was shining, and Damien was with her, their duet a public defiance of his plans. He slipped out, his mind racing. He needed a bigger move, something to break them apart for good. The set ended with a standing ovation, the crowd chanting Simone's name. She and Damien stepped off stage breathless, their hands brushing as they moved to the wings. "That was..." Simone started, then laughed, shaking her head. "Crazy." "Good crazy," Damien said, his eyes searching hers. "I meant every word up there." She looked away, her heart pounding. The duet had felt like a confession, a bridge across the years, but the weight of their children and Roland's schemes kept her guarded. She said, "We need to talk about the notes," steering the conversation to safer ground. "What did your lawyer find?" Damien's expression darkened. "Enough to know Roland's been playing a long game. My father's deals were dirty bribes, cover-ups. Roland's got the evidence and uses it to keep me in check. But I'm working on a way to turn it against him." Simone nodded, her own note burning in her memory. "Jimmy says Roland's been talking to promoters and spreading lies. He's trying to bury me, Damien. And now you're in his sights too. Then we fight back together," he said, his voice firm. "No more running." She studied him, the man she'd loved for one night and carried in her heart for a decade. Trust was a risk, but the music they'd made tonight felt like a promise. "Okay," she said finally, "together." As the crowd dispersed, Clara, the promoter from the showcase, approached. Simone, that was magic. She set her eyes bright. I'm setting up a meeting with a label next week. You're ready for the next step. Simone's heart leapt, but she tempered it with caution. Thank you, Clara. I won't let you down. Damien watched her pride swelling in his chest. She was a star. He'd do whatever it took to protect her light. But Roland's absence from the lounge didn't go unnoticed. His cousin was plotting, and the anonymous notes warned that the fight was far from over. Later at home, Simone tucked the children in their questions about her big show filling the air. Theo, ever curious, asked, "Was it like singing with Louis Armstrong, Mama?" She laughed, kissing his forehead. Not quite, baby. But it was special. As she sat alone, the duet with Damien replayed in her mind, a melody of what could be. But the note about Roland's blood debt lingered a shadow over her triumph. She didn't know what Roland was planning, but she knew one thing: she'd fight for her children, her music, and maybe, just maybe, for the man who'd sung with her tonight. Damien, too, lay awake, the city's music drifting through his window. The duet had been a revelation, a glimpse of a life he wanted, a life with Simone, with their children. But Roland's shadow loomed, and the secrets of the past were a ticking clock. The jazz of New Orleans pulsed on, carrying their story forward, note by note. The New Orleans dawn painted the sky in hues of amber, and rose casting a soft glow over the Ninth Ward. Simone Thibodeaux sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the familiar clutter of her children's lives. Ella's books stacked precariously, Noah's sketches of ships taped to the fridge, Lila's neatly folded laundry, and Theo's toy trumpet abandoned mid-toot. The quadruplets were at school, their laughter still echoing in her mind, but Simone's thoughts were heavy. The duet with Damien at the Blue Crescent had been a moment of connection, a fragile bridge across a decade of distance. But the anonymous note about Roland's blood debt and his schemes hung over her like a storm cloud. Across town, Damien Caldwell stood in his office, the Mississippi River glinting below like a steel ribbon. The anonymous note about his father's dirty deals with Gulf Coast shipping had lit a fire in him. He'd spent days digging through old contracts with his lawyer Evelyn, uncovering a trail of bribes and cover-ups that tainted his family's legacy. His cousin Roland had been using this knowledge to manipulate him, keeping Damien tethered to the company's darker past. But the duet with Simone had shifted something in him, a determination to fight for his business and the family he'd only just discovered. Simone's day was a blur of routine rehearsals at the Blue Crescent, a quick call with Clara about the upcoming label meeting, and a stop at the grocery store for the kids' favorite snacks. But the note's warning about Roland gnawed at her. For years, she'd kept the truth about Ella, Noah, Lila, and Theo from Damien, fearing he'd try to take them or disrupt their lives. With Roland's schemes escalating, she wondered if shielding them was enough. The children were her world, but they were also Damien's, and the thought of Roland targeting them to hurt her or him sent a chill down her spine. Damien, meanwhile, was piecing together his own plan. Evelyn had found a key document, a 2010 contract with Gulf Coast, that detailed a hush payment after a dock worker's death. Roland's father had signed it, implicating himself and Damien's father in the cover-up. Roland had inherited this leverage to secure his position in the company and keep Damien in check. Damien needed to confront him, but he needed more than documents. He needed proof Roland was actively weaponizing this against him and Simone. The confrontation came sooner than expected. That evening, Roland showed up at Damien's office unannounced, his usual smirk replaced by a cold edge. He tossed a folder onto the desk, its contents spilling out photos of Simone with various promoters taken out of context to suggest impropriety. "Thought you should see this," Roland said, leaning back in his chair. "Your singer's been busy. And those kids of hers, word is they're yours. Quite the secret she's kept." Damien's blood ran cold. He hadn't told Roland about the children, but his cousin's network was vast, and New Orleans was a city where secrets rarely stayed buried. "What do you want, Roland?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Control," Roland said bluntly. "Step back from the company, let me run things. Or I go public with your father's deals and make sure those kids get dragged into the mess. Imagine the headlines, shipping heir's secret family tangled in scandal." Damien's fists clenched, but he kept his composure. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Roland's eyes gleamed. "I've got the contracts and the proof. And I know people who'd love to tear Simone's career apart. Those kids, their collateral damage, the threat to his children. Ella, Noah, Lila." Theo lit a fire in Damien's chest. He stood towering over Roland. "If you go near them, you're done, family or not." Roland laughed, unfazed. "Your soft cousin. Always have been. Think about my offer. You've got a week." As Roland left, Damien's mind raced. He needed to protect Simone and the children, but Roland's threat was real. He called Simone, his voice urgent. "We need to meet. Now. It's about the kids." Simone met him at a quiet cafe near the French Quarter, her heart pounding. She'd sensed something was coming, but the fear in Damien's voice was new. When he told her about Roland's threat, her hands trembled, spilling her coffee. "He knows about the kids," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He does," Damien said, his jaw tight. "And he's using them to get to me, to us. He's got dirt on my father's deal, stuff that could ruin the company if it goes public. He wants control and is willing to drag you and the kids through the mud to get it." Simone's eyes blazed. "He's not touching my children, our children," Damien corrected gently, his gaze steady. "I'm in this, Simone. I won't let him hurt them or you." She looked away, her heart a battlefield. She'd spent years building a life for her kids, relying on no one but herself. Trusting Damien meant letting go of that control. But Roland's threat was a storm she couldn't face alone. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We fight smart," Damien said. "Evelyn's digging deeper into the contracts. If we can prove that Roland blackmailed me, we can neutralize him. But we need to keep the kids safe. Can you get them somewhere secure for a few days?" Simone nodded, thinking of her sister in Baton Rouge. "I can send them to my sister's. She's got a big house and loves the kids. They'll be safe there." "Good," Damien said. "I'll hire security to watch the place discreetly. And I'll talk to Jimmy at the Blue Crescent. Make sure your gigs are covered if you need time." Simone's throat tightened. His willingness to protect her children, to step up without hesitation, chipped away at her walls. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice soft. "You could walk away." "Because they're mine too," he said, his eyes raw. "And because I've spent 10 years regretting that I left you. I'm not making that mistake again." The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility. Simone didn't respond, but her silence was softer, less guarded. They parted with a plan. Simone would arrange for the kids to stay with her sister, and Damien would work with Evelyn to build a case against Roland. But the fear lingered, a shadow over their fragile alliance. Simone packed the kids' bags the next day, keeping her tone light to avoid alarming them. She said a little adventure with Aunt Marie, smiling as Theo clutched his toy trumpet. Ella, ever perceptive, studied her mother's face, but didn't push. Noah and Lila helped pack, and their trust in Simone was absolute. As they boarded the bus to Baton Rouge, Simone hugged them tightly, whispering promises to see them soon. Damien, meanwhile, met with Evelyn, who'd uncovered a paper trail linking Roland to recent payments from a Gulf Coast subsidiary, proof he was still profiting from the old deals. It wasn't enough to take him down, but it was a start. Damien also hired a private investigator to tail Roland, hoping to catch him in the act of another scheme. Simone performed at the Blue Crescent that night, her voice carrying a fierce edge. She sang "Strange Fruit," a song that felt like a battle cry against the threats closing in. Damien was there in his usual corner, his presence a quiet anchor. When their eyes met, she felt a spark of strength, a reminder that she wasn't alone. But Roland was watching too from a distance, his plans darkening. He'd underestimated Simone's resilience and Damien's determination, but he wasn't done. The children were his leverage, and he'd use them to break the bond forming between their parents. The city's music pulsed on a witness to the storm brewing as Simone and Damien braced for the fight of their lives. The days that followed were a delicate dance of caution and courage. Simone checked in with her sister daily, ensuring the kids were safe and happy. Damien worked tirelessly gathering evidence against Roland while keeping his company running. Their alliance grew stronger and was built on a shared purpose, but the threat to their children kept them on edge. The city watched, and its jazz was a reminder that love and danger often played the same tune. The Hotel Monteleone's ballroom glowed with opulence, its chandeliers casting golden light over a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. The annual Crescent City Charity Gala was in full swing, a glittering event that drew New Orleans' elite to raise funds for local schools. The air was thick with the scent of orchids and the clink of champagne flutes, but beneath the polished surface tension simmered. Tonight was more than a fundraiser, it was a battlefield, and Simone Thibodeaux and Damien Caldwell were ready for war. Simone stood backstage, her crimson gown a bold contrast to the nervous energy in her chest. She was set to perform a short set, her voice a centerpiece of the evening, but her thoughts were on Roland's threat. The children were safe with her sister in Baton Rouge, guarded by discreet security Damien had arranged, but the fear of Roland's reach lingered. She adjusted her earrings, her fingers steady, despite the storm in her heart. Clara, the promoter, had promised this performance could seal her deal with the record label, but Simone knew Roland was planning something. The anonymous notes had warned her he was a snake, and tonight he'd strike. Damien stood near the bar, his tailored suit sharp and his eyes sharper, scanning the crowd. He'd spent the week building a case against Roland with Evelyn, his lawyer. They'd uncovered bank records linking Roland to illicit payments from Gulf Coast Shipping's subsidiaries, proof he was profiting from the same dirty deals he'd used to blackmail Damien. They'd also found emails where Roland orchestrated the rumors against Simone, paying off industry insiders to spread lies. It was enough to expose him, but Damien must play this carefully. Roland was here, his smirk visible across the room, and Damien knew his cousin was ready to make good on his threat to drag the children and the family's past into the open. As the MC introduced Simone, the crowd hushed and she took the stage. Her voice filled the ballroom with summertime, the notes a haunting blend of hope and sorrow. Damien watched, his heart swelling with pride and protectiveness. She was a force, her presence commanding, and he knew he'd do anything to keep her and their children safe. Halfway through her set, Roland made his move. He'd slipped a USB drive to a journalist friend in the crowd, loaded with doctored documents that painted Damien's father as a criminal mastermind, and Simone as a gold digger who'd hidden his children for leverage. He stepped to a microphone during a pause in Simone's performance, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," Roland said, his tone smooth but venomous. "Before we continue, I have an announcement. Our esteemed shipping magnate Damien Caldwell has been hiding a dark past. His father's deals built this empire on lies, and his so-called star performer," here he gestured to Simone, "has her own secrets. 4 children, his children kept from him for years. Ask yourself why." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the room. Simone froze, her hands trembling at her sides. Damien's blood boiled, but he'd anticipated this. He stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Roland, you've had your say. Now let me have mine." He signaled to Evelyn, who was waiting in the wings with a projector. She connected a laptop and the screen behind the stage lit up with Roland's bank records emails and the contract tying him to Gulf Coast's dirty deals. Damien faced the crowd, his voice steady. My cousin's been blackmailing me for years, using my father's mistakes to control me. He spread lies about Simone to ruin her career, and he tried to sabotage her show last week. Tonight he thought he'd bury us. But he's the one who's been profiting from the past, not me. The crowd was silent, the weight of the evidence undeniable. Roland's smirk faltered as whispers turned to glares. He tried to interrupt, but Damien pressed on. I've made mistakes, but hiding my children isn't one of them. I didn't know about them until recently, and I'm here to make that right. Simone, he turned to her, his eyes raw, is the heart of this city, and I won't let anyone tear her down. Simone's breath caught her eyes glistening. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing their support, a wave that drowned Roland's accusations. He tried to slip away, but security tipped off by Damien blocked his path. You're done, Roland, Damien said, his voice low. The board's already voting to remove you, and the police are waiting to talk about those payments. Roland's face twisted with rage, but he was escorted out, the crowd parting like a sea. Simone finished her set with "At last," her voice a triumphant cry that brought the room to its feet. As she stepped off stage, Damien was there, his hand extended. She took it, their fingers intertwining, a silent promise forged in the heat of the moment. Backstage, Clara approached, her eyes bright. Simone, the label wants you in the studio tomorrow. You're a star. She glanced at Damien, a smile tugging at her lips. And you two? That was one hell of a show. They laughed, the tension breaking, but the victory was bittersweet. As the gala wound down, Damien and Simone stepped onto the hotel's balcony, the city's lights sprawling below. He's gone, Damien said, his voice soft. But he mentioned a friend, someone pulling strings. We're not out of this yet. Simone nodded, her hand still in his. The kids are safe, but I can't shake the feeling there's more coming. There is, Damien said, his jaw tight. But we'll face it together. You, me, Ella, Noah, Lila, Theo. We're a family now. The word family hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Simone's heart ached with its weight, but for the first time she felt hope. They stood together, the city's music a soft undercurrent, as a shadow lingered on the horizon, a mysterious ally of Roland's, watching, waiting, ready to strike. The gala's aftermath was a whirlwind. Damien worked with Evelyn to finalize Roland's removal from the company, ensuring the evidence was airtight. Simone prepared for her studio session, her voice stronger than ever, but her thoughts were on the children. She called her sister, hearing Ella's chatter, Noah's quiet pride, Lila's calm updates, and Theo's endless questions. They were her anchor, and now with Damien by her side, she dared to imagine a future where they all belonged. But the shadow of Roland's ally loomed, a reminder that their fight wasn't over. The city's jazz pulsed on a melody of love and danger, carrying their story toward an uncertain crescendo. The New Orleans sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the French Quarter, as Simone Thibodeaux stood in her apartment, surrounded by the familiar chaos of her children's lives. Ella's books were scattered across the table, Noah's latest ship sketch pinned to the fridge, Lila's neatly folded laundry stacked in a corner, and Theo's toy trumpet lay abandoned mid-toot. The quadruplets were back from Baton Rouge, their laughter filling the space after a week with their aunt. Simone's heart felt lighter, but the weight of recent events, Roland's schemes, the gala showdown, and the looming threat of his mysterious ally kept her on edge. Yet something had shifted. Damien Caldwell's presence, fierce defense at the gala, and promise to be part of their children's lives had cracked open a door she'd kept locked for a decade. Across town, Damien stood in his office, the Mississippi River, a shimmering ribbon below. The victory over Roland was a relief, but the shadow of his cousin's ally in the dark lingered, Evelyn, his lawyer, had secured Roland's removal from the company, and the evidence of his blackmail was now with the authorities. But Damien focused elsewhere on Simone, Eleanor, Leela, and Theo. He wanted to be a father not just in name, but in truth, and that meant earning Simone's trust step by careful step. Simone's days were a whirlwind of preparation. The record label had fast-tracked her studio session after the gala, and she spent hours recording tracks that blended jazz standards with her own compositions. Her voice carried a new strength fueled by the triumph over Roland's lies and the fragile hope of a future with Damien. But she was still cautious, her independence, a shield she wasn't ready to lower. The children didn't know about their father yet, and she grappled with telling them how to weave Damien into their lives without disrupting the world she'd built. Damien, meanwhile, was taking action. He'd quietly contacted a music producer he knew from his business network, Marcus, who'd worked with jazz artists across the South. Over coffee at Café du Monde, Damien outlined his plan. He said Simone's got a shot at something big, dusting powdered sugar off his hands. "I want to fund her album, but no strings are attached. She deserves to shine on her terms." Marcus raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You're serious about this one, huh? Most guys in your position would want control." "Not me," Damien said, his voice firm. "This is about her, about giving her what she's earned." Marcus agreed to broker the deal, ensuring the funding came through a neutral third party, so Simone wouldn't feel pressured. Damien also hired a family lawyer not to fight for custody, but to draft an agreement that protected Simone's rights as the children's primary guardian. He wanted her to know he wasn't here to take anything away, only to add to their lives. The next evening, Damien arrived at the Blue Crescent, where Simone performed a low-key set. The lounge was packed, the crowd buzzing with whispers of her gala performance. She sang "My Funny Valentine," her voice a velvet confession, and Damien felt every note like a touch. When she stepped off stage, he was waiting, a folder in his hand. "What's this?" Simone asked, eyeing the folder as she sipped water. "Something for you," he said, handing it over. "I'm funding your album. Marcus is handling the details, but it's your show, your music, your vision. No input from me unless you want it." Simone's breath caught as she scanned the documents. The funding was generous enough to cover studio time, musicians, and promotion. Her eyes narrowed, searching for a catch. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but guarded. "Because you're a star," he said. "And because I believe in you. Always have." She looked away, her throat tight. The gesture was more than money. It was respect, a recognition of her talent and struggle. But the lawyer's letter tucked in the folder caught her attention. She read it, her eyes widening. "You're not trying to take the kids?" "Never," Damien said, his voice raw. "That's to protect you, to show I'm not here to control or take anything. I want to be their father, Simone, but only if you're ready, only on your terms." The words hit her like a wave, washing away a layer of fear she'd carried for years. She'd built walls to protect her children and her heart, but Damien's actions were chipping away at them. "I need to think," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a lot." "Take all the time you need," he said, his eyes steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Simone sat with Eleanor, Lila, and Theo the next day, her heart pounding. She'd decided to tell them about Damien to ease them into the truth. They were sprawled on the living room floor, playing a board game when she spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice steady. "Your father, he's here in New Orleans. His name's Damien, and he wants to meet you." Ella's eyes narrowed, sharp as ever. "Why now?" she asked, her tone protective. "He didn't know about you," Simone said, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't tell him because I thought it was best for us. But he's here now, and wants to be part of your lives, if you want that." Noah looked up from his sketch, curious. Does he like ships? Simone smiled, her heart aching. Yeah, he does. He runs a big shipping company. Lila, quiet but observant, asked, Is he nice? He's trying to be, Simone said. He helped me at work and he's doing things to show he cares. But it's up to you guys. We'll go slow. Theo, ever the optimist, grinned. Can he play trumpet? Simone laughed, pulling him into a hug. We'll find out. The conversation was a start, a seed planted. Simone arranged for Damien to meet them at a park the following weekend, a neutral space where the kids could feel safe. She was nervous, but the weight of her secret was lighter now, shared with the people who mattered most. Damien spent the week preparing. His office was a backdrop to his thoughts. He bought small gifts for the kids, a book for Ella, art supplies for Noah, a journal for Lila, a toy ship for Theo. Simple things to show he'd been listening, learning about them. He met with Evelyn to ensure Roland's case was airtight, but his mind was on the park on the moment he'd meet his children. The meeting was tentative but warm. Ella was cautious, sizing him up, but Noah's eyes lit up at the ship, and Theo's questions about Damien's work came fast and furious. Lila watched quietly, her smile shy but genuine. Simone stood nearby, her heart swelling as she saw Damien's effort and his patience. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Simone performed at the Blue Crescent that night, her voice carrying a new depth. She sang, "What a Wonderful World," dedicating it to her children, her eyes finding Damien in the crowd. He smiled, a promise in his gaze, and she felt her walls crumble a little more. The city's music wrapped around them, a healing melody as they took their first steps toward a shared future. But in the shadows, Roland's ally watched a figure whose name remained hidden. The gala had been a setback, but their plans were far from over. The city hummed its jazz, a reminder that peace was fragile, and the following note could bring danger. The days that followed were a delicate balance. Simone recorded her album, her voice soaring, while Damien began regular visits with the kids, earning their trust with stories and games. Their bond grew tentative but real, and Simone found herself softening, daring to believe in a future where they could be a family. But the shadow of Roland's ally loomed, a quiet threat in the city's rhythm, waiting to strike. The French Quarter was alive with its annual winter festival, a celebration that turned the streets into a kaleidoscope of music, lights, and laughter. The air carried the scent of beignets and the wail of trumpets, a fitting backdrop for the special concert at Jackson Square. Simone Thibodeaux stood backstage, her breath visible in the cool evening air, her heart full. Tonight was her night, a showcase for her newly recorded album, backed by the label and funded by Damien Caldwell. The stage was set with lanterns. The band warmed up and the crowd buzzed with anticipation, a mix of locals and tourists drawn by the promise of her voice. Simone wore a silver gown that shimmered under the lights, her curls loose and framing her face. Her children, Ella, Noah, Lila, and Theo, sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Damien was beside them, his presence steady, a quiet anchor in the night's chaos. The past weeks had been a journey, telling the kids about their father, watching Damien earn their trust, and feeling her walls soften. Roland's schemes had been thwarted, his removal from the company complete, but the shadow of his mysterious ally lingered, a note of discord in their harmony. Damien watched the kids, his heart swelling. Ella clutched a book he'd given her, a New Orleans jazz history. Noah's sketchpad was open, his pencil capturing the stage's glow. Lila's journal lay in her lap, her calm presence mirroring Simone's strength. Theo, clutching his toy trumpet, bounced with excitement, whispering questions about the band. Damien answered patiently, his eyes drifting to Simone as she prepared. He'd spent years building an empire, but this, his children. Simone's music was his true legacy. The concert began with a flourish, the band launching into Basin Street blues. Simone's voice soared rich and soulful, weaving stories of the city's heart. The crowd swayed, some dancing in the aisles, others lost in the melody. She transitioned to her own composition, a song called River's Promise, written for her children, and the man who'd come back into their lives. The lyrics spoke of second chances of love that endured like the Mississippi, and Damien felt every word like a vow. As she sang, he glanced at the kids, seeing their awe, their pride. Ella's eyes were bright, Noah's pencil still, Lila's smile soft, Theo's grin wide. They were a family not perfect but real, and Damien knew he'd fight for them no matter what came next. Backstage, Clara, the promoter, watched with a smile. "She's a star," she whispered to Marcus, the producer Damien had brought in. "This album's going to change everything." Marcus nodded. "And that guy?" He gestured to Damien. "He's not just funding it, he's all in." The set ended with When the Saints Go Marching, in the crowd joining in their voices a joyful chorus. Simone invited the kids on stage for the final note, and they ran up laughing, Theo blowing his toy trumpet to cheers. Damien followed his hand, finding Simone's, their fingers intertwining. The crowd roared, a moment of love and unity, the city's heartbeat pulsing. As the applause faded, Simone and Damien stepped backstage, the kids trailing behind, chattering about the show. "Mama, you were terrific," Theo said, hugging her legs. "Ella, ever serious?" added. "You made the whole square feel alive." Simone laughed, pulling them close. "You four make me feel alive." Damien watched, his heart full. He'd never imagined this, a family, a shared stage, a love rekindled. But as they left the square, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered, his voice cautious. "Who is this?" A low, unfamiliar voice replied. "You thought Roland was the end game, Caldwell. He was just the start. Watch your back." The line went dead, and Damien's blood ran cold. He glanced at Simone, who was helping Lila with her coat, unaware of the call. He didn't tell her, not yet. Tonight was hers, their children's, and he wouldn't let a shadow steal it. But the threat was real, a reminder that their story wasn't finished. They walked through the quarter, the kids skipping ahead, Simone's hand in his. The festival lights glowed, and the music was a constant undercurrent. "What's next?" Simone asked, her voice soft, her eyes searching his. "We keep going," Damien said, squeezing her hand. "You, me, the kids. Whatever comes, we face it together." She nodded, a smile breaking through. Together. The city's jazz pulsed, a symphony of love, danger, and hope. The mysterious allies' call was a warning, a new chapter waiting to unfold. But for now, Simone, Damien, and their children stood united, their hearts in tune with New Orleans' endless song, ready for whatever melody came next. The night ended with the family at a quiet cafe, sharing beignets and laughter. Simone's album was set to release in the spring, and Damien was planning a summer trip with the kids, a chance to build memories. But the call lingered in his mind, a shadow note in their harmony. The city watched its music, a promise that their story would continue, with love as its rhythm and danger as its counterpoint.